research interests have really been sparked by several major discoveries of the last 50 years. The Dead Sea Scrolls were found 50 years ago in Israel, down by the shores of the Dead Sea, and they open up a whole new insight into a major Jewish group of the 1st century BC and the 1st century AD. Also the Gnostic writings, which were found in Egypt almost at the same time, coincidentally. And these writings open up a whole new perspective on a different form of Christianity that we really didn't know much about until recently. It was a form of Christianity that rivaled mainstream Christianity, or really what became mainstream Christianity during the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th century. I have a book coming up called How Jesus Became Christian. It's going to be released in mid-March in Canada by Random House, in the United States by St. Martin's Press, and in the UK and Australia and New Zealand by Orion Publishing in London. And this book grows out of my interest in some of these puzzles of early Christianity. Things like, how did the image of Jesus get changed? How did we go from a nice Jewish rabbi teacher who was talking about the kingdom of God to something that was 100 years later changed around? All of a sudden we find Jesus being talked about as a divinity, as part of the Godhead, and the early formulations of a doctrine of the Trinity. He's changed in dramatic ways from a human teacher announcing and expecting and being somewhat dismayed by the fact that some of his promises did not come true, into a God who is worshipped. How did that take place? It also was sparked by noticing how different the religion of Paul was from that of Jesus. People have never really commented on that to any great extent. They knew that Paul was different from Jesus, but what does it mean, and where and how was he different? And I look at Paul's religion as growing out of a mystical vision. It's a different origin than the religion of Jesus. Jesus had disciples who were with him for 3 years or so. But Paul never met him, never quotes him, rarely, never refers to his teachings. I come to the conclusion that Paul was a different religion. One of the most difficult things of doing this book was not looking over my shoulder to see what scholars were there. I can imagine some of my colleagues, even some of them here at York, saying, Wilson, you really should put in a footnote here. Not everybody agrees with this position. So it's really not an academic book. It's a popular book meant for the general reader. I take the general reader gradually into the world of early Christianity, into the message of Jesus, into the different message of Paul, and I show how those two different religions got connected. I think it's highly controversial. I think it's controversial in a number of respects. First of all, the account that I give of Paul is bound to be provocative. I say that Paul is a different religion. It's the worship of the Christ figure. It has nothing to do with the religion of Jesus, and Paul is very clear about that. So the extent to which I say that Paul was a different religion is bound to upset people, but also what I say about Jesus is controversial too. I see him as perhaps a little bit more Jewish than most scholars see him, and I take the fact that Jesus was Jewish seriously. I don't think a lot of my contemporary scholars do that. Oh yeah, they say that he was Jewish, even his mother was Jewish, and his brother James was Jewish. But what did that mean in real life? How did he tie into the Jewish expectations of a kingdom of God in the 1st century? One of the interesting things of the texts of the 2nd century is that decade after decade after decade, early Christian leaders are attacking every aspect of Judaism. They're vilifying the leaders. They're trying to rob the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible of its value. They're denying the Jewish concept of God. Everything that the Jewish heritage valued was either being spoken of derogatorily or else were appropriated by the new Christian movement. And out of that, I made a very interesting discovery. And this was a surprise to me as I wrote the book. I began to see the origins of Christian anti-Semitism, which was a phenomenon that has long interested me. Why has every form of Christianity throughout all generations been somewhat anti-Semitic, and at times in the past more vehemently anti-Semitic than today? early Christian movement in Jerusalem for decades was at peace with every other form of Judaism, with the Pharisees, with the Essenes, with the Zealots. They ran afoul of one segment called the Sadducees and the high priests, but other than that, they lived in perfect harmony with their friends and their relatives and their neighbors. And you contrast that with Paul. When Paul comes onto the scene, havoc is created. Wherever Paul goes, whether it's his conversion in Damascus, or his coming into Jerusalem, or any of his travels through what is modern-day Turkey and Greece, everywhere he goes, he stirs up trouble. It's serious trouble. People want to kill him in Damascus and Jerusalem. He's hauled before Roman authorities and is flogged and stoned a number of different times. This man did something differently than what Jesus' early followers said and did. So why? So my follow-up research is looking at this contrast. Earliest followers of Jesus versus Paul and his group. So there'll be a lot in this book for people to get riled up about, but at the same time, I don't see this book as a negative book. I would like this book to sort of open up a dialogue and get people to expand their horizons and really probe the same kind of area that I've been interested in probing, and I found that many of my students have just delighted in this.